All right, it's time to do the season preview and prediction for the Ohio State Buckeyes 2024 college football season. I'll be honest, I thought I'd already done this one. And then I was going through the list over on Patreon, and I saw Ohio State on there, and I was like, let me check and make sure I did that. And I went back through the prediction playlist, and I didn't see Ohio State on there. And I'm like, well, did I not add it to the playlist? I went and looked, and I couldn't find, I don't know why I thought I already did this one. So maybe I'm a little late to the party here, but here we go. A breakdown, a preview, and then a game-by-game prediction for the Ohio State Buckeyes 2024 college football season. Shout out to Nate over on the Patreon page, by the way. He suggested this Ohio State prediction. So, Nate, I hope you enjoy this one, buddy. Big thank you to everybody over on the Patreon page. The support y'all give me over there is unbelievable. Thank you very much. If you want to check the Patreon page out, the link is in the description of this video. We're how many days away are we from 13? We're 13 days away from the start of the college football season. Week 0 kicks off August 24th, Georgia Tech and Florida State in Ireland. And of course, on Saturdays during the college football season, I stream just about all day long over on Patreon. So make sure you get signed up. We have a really good time over there. All right, here we go. Ohio State. Now, I feel like Ohio State might be the most well-known team nationally this season. They have been talked about a ton in the offseason by everybody that talks about college football. They're a huge brand. They're a well-known team. Everybody knows their successes and their struggles recently. Everybody knows about their transfer portal additions with Caleb Downs and Judkins and quarterback Will Howard. Judkins, the running back. Everybody knows about the wide receiver room. Like I just feel like Ohio State is a known commodity in the world of college football. And when people try to criticize or maybe suggest that Ohio State won't get to, the Big Ten title game or the playoffs or win a national title, whatever, it always comes back to, well, Ryan Day, he's never done it or whatever. So I don't know that we really need to break down Ohio State to the degree that we break down some other teams. I feel like the majority of people that would be watching a video like this know that Kyle McCord transferred out, and they know that they brought Will Howard in at quarterback. Chip Kelly got brought in as offensive coordinator and is supposedly taking over the play calling duties. More on that in a second. So I'm going to follow the same pattern I've done with the rest of the preview and prediction videos, but some of this stuff maybe we'll go a little quicker on because Ohio State's pretty much a known commodity at this point. I don't feel like you're going to learn much about Ohio State's roster from watching a video like this. You probably already know just about everything you need to know, but let's start with Ryan Day, their head coach. He's been there 5 or 6 years now. He has an 88% winning percentage, which is just mind-boggling to win that number of games. And whatever excuses you want to throw out about Ryan Day, and I've heard them all doing a channel like this. Well, he loses to Michigan. He's lost to Michigan 3 years in a row. He hasn't won the Big Ten. He can't win a national. He can't win a national title. He's a crybaby. I get all that, but he's won 88% of his games. Whatever team you're a fan of, I want you to find out your coach's winning percentage. It's probably not 88%. It's an unbelievable record. He has lost the big ones multiple times, and we're going to talk a lot about that, but he has never lost more than 2 games in a season. That's including the postseason. In fact, he's only lost 2 games in the regular season 1 time. That's great news. You know what the bad news is? It was in 2021, the last time they played Oregon. That's right. They lost to Oregon early in the regular season and then lost a Big Ten conference game later in the regular season. Who was that they lost to later in the regular season in 2021? Maybe there's an Ohio State fan down below that can let me know. I'm drawing a blank on the other team that beat them back in 2021. They bring Chip Kelly in as offensive coordinator, and supposedly the play calling duties are going to be turned over to him. Now, I obviously think that's a great idea. If you've been watching my channel for any amount of time at all, I don't think very highly of coaches that call their own plays, either offensively or defensively. I feel like as a head coach, you need to have both an offensive and a defensive coordinator, and you need to hand over as much responsibility as possible to those two people. There is so much to do as a head coach. I feel it's a burden and a hindrance for a head coach to be a play caller or his own coordinator on either side of the ball. That's not to say that it never works, but it doesn't work way more than it does. You look at Jimbo Fisher's problems at Texas A&M trying to call his own plays. Gus Malzahn for a long time at Auburn got himself in trouble trying to do that. There are some success stories out there of some coaches who have done it, but as a general rule, I don't particularly like it. Georgia happens to be my favorite team, and Kirby Smart is widely considered to be one of the best defensive minds on the planet. He's never called his own defensive plays since the day he's had a defensive coordinator every single year at Georgia, and he turns those responsibilities over to him. Another one of your job duties as head coach is hiring coaches that you trust and are capable of doing what they're hired to do. I don't understand the point of hiring. Take Ryan Day, for example. I wouldn't understand Ryan Day hiring an offensive coordinator, but then going, I don't trust him to call the plays, though. Well, then you shouldn't have hired him. So anyway, I sort of have it's a sort of I have to see it to believe it thing with some of these coaches who have called their own plays for a while, and then it's announced or it's stated or whatever that they're going to hand over play calling duties to someone else. Now, I find it hard to believe that Chip Kelly would have left a head coaching job in the Power Five, a Power Five coaching job that was about to be a part of the Big Ten in UCLA, to take a demotion to offensive coordinator at Ohio State if he wasn't guaranteed to be able to call the plays. But again, until I actually see it and it's proved that, yes, Chip Kelly is calling the plays, I'm going to be a little bit skeptical about that. It's nothing against Ryan Day or Ohio State. I apply that skepticism across the board to head coaches who have been calling their own plays and then hire somebody to come in and do it. Jim Knowles returns as defensive coordinator, and he gets a lot of credit, but I don't think he gets enough credit. The turnaround in defense at Ohio State over the last 3 or 4 years has been remarkable. And I think we need to give Ryan Day a little bit of credit on this too, because there are some coaches out there who have struggled on one side of the ball or the other for long periods of time and have not been able to get it figured out. Lincoln Riley, I'm talking to you, at 2 major programs, Oklahoma and Southern Cal. And it looked as though early in Ryan Day's career that he may be heading down a similar path with Ohio State. They had quarterbacks that were putting up ridiculous Heisman caliber type numbers every single year. They were scoring 1 million points a game, and they were getting beat by physical teams that could run the ball. This is where the whole kind of soft thing first started as sort of a derogatory term to be applied to Ohio State. Speaking of the Oregon game back in 2021, in Columbus, Oregon just ran it down their throat over and over and over again. There was nothing they could do. Michigan was doing it on a yearly basis, just pounding them. There was nothing they could do. Ryan Day brought in Jim Knowles, but it's more than that. It's a philosophy change, right? It's okay, we've been doing this on offense, and it's not working. At least it's not getting us where we want to go. We've got to do 2 things. We've got to improve the defense, and we've got to maybe change our offensive philosophy a little bit to better suit a defense. And what I mean by that is if you watched Ohio State play last year, and I know Kyle McCord wasn't great at QB, especially compared to the run of quarterbacks Ohio State had before that. I'm not even specifically talking about the QB play. If you just watched their offense, it was a different style. It was obvious that a different philosophy had been adopted offensively for Ohio State, an offensive philosophy that better suited their defense, right? They didn't score as many points last year as we're used to seeing them score. They weren't as explosive as we're used to seeing them be. They clearly didn't have a quarterback in the Heisman conversation with 5,000 yards. But they were a pretty good team. Yes, they lost to Michigan. And, if you're Ohio State, that's unacceptable, and I get that. But I think they were a better team last year, probably than what we have seen maybe in any other year, with the exception of the C.J. Stroud 2 years ago with C.J. Stroud. They were a really good sort of complete football team. And I expect that trend to continue. I think they're going to have one of the best defenses in all of college football yet again in 2024. We'll talk a little bit more about the defense in a minute. But, of course, on offense, McCord is out. He enters the transfer portal, sort of pushed out. I think we all kind of know what happened there. He was basically told, look, thank you for your service, but we're going to kind of go a different direction QB-wise next year, so you might want to consider the portal. And he did, and good luck to him, and we'll see how he does at Syracuse, I believe, is where he landed. And then they brought in out of the portal Will Howard. Now, Will Howard has had a good college career. He's definitely got a ton of experience, but he's not somebody that, we've been seeing in Heisman conversations or putting up 5,000 yards a year. It looks like they're kind of looking for basically a more experienced, slightly better version of what they had last year. And that's probably what they're going to get with a guy like Will Howard. Now, behind him, they've got Devin Brown, who's a little bit more athletic. And then they've got two really good young guys that I doubt they end up keeping both of them. They've got, is it Aaron Nolan and Julian Sayin, I believe, are both there. I'd be shocked if they end up keeping both of those guys. One of those guys is going to become the starter. Devin Brown is probably going to be the odd man out there, I would assume. I don't know that. Maybe an Ohio State man can let me know. We're sort of looking into the future. Now, I'm not talking about this season now. Obviously, this is going to be the Will Howard show this year. But, going forward, I don't know if Devin Brown may never start a game from here forward at Ohio State. I don't know. We'll see what happens with Aaron Nolan and Julian Sayin, but I wouldn't be surprised if they lose one or two of those guys to the portal, but they're loaded at the quarterback position, I guess is the point I'm trying to make. There. Quarterback position, in comes Will Howard from Kansas State. We'll see. Like I said, in my mind, sort of a juiced up version of what they had last year. A lot more experience and hoping for a little bit better, maybe some more explosive plays, that kind of thing, to take advantage of some of the wide receivers and the talent that they have in that room, which we'll talk about in a second. Now, when you look at the running backs, they've been blessed at the running back position for several years now, and Travion Henderson deciding to come back for his senior year is a huge deal. In fact, a lot of Ohio State players who were draft eligible made the decision to return. Ohio State looks a lot like, at least in that regard, as far as players choosing to come back for this season, reminds me a lot of what happened last year with Michigan. Or what happened 3 seasons ago. Was it the first of Georgia's 2 national titles was a similar thing. A bunch of upperclassmen decided to come back like a one last hurrah thing, and it worked out. Worked out for Georgia, worked out for Michigan. Ohio State fans obviously hoping it works out for them again this year. So Travion Henderson comes back, and then on top of that, they go out to the portal and get probably the best running back in the portal, Quinshon Judkins out of Ole Miss, who's been one of the best running backs in the SEC for 2 straight years down there. An unbelievable talent up under Lane Kiffin's offense there at Ole Miss. They bring him in. Maybe the best 1-2 punch right there in all of college football when it comes to your running back room, Travion Henderson and Quinshon Judkins. And then, of course, the wide receiver room. We don't need to spend a lot of time on this because everyone knows. Now, they lose Marvin Harrison, and look, under normal conditions, almost any other team in the country, you lose a guy like Marvin Harrison, you go, well, we're not going to be able to replace him. We're going to have to sort of do a group approach to try to replace what we got from Marvin Harrison. Ohio State's got 2 or 3 wide receivers that by themselves can probably give them what Marvin Harrison gave them last year. It's just an embarrassment of riches for Ohio State at the wide receiver position. This is something we've talked about for years, whether you're talking about recruiting or even during the season when you're watching these guys play. It's just loaded with NFL wide receivers. But Emeka Egbuka is there. I think people forget how talented this guy is because he's been behind, Najigba Smith and Marvin Harrison, and these guys just sort of get all the chatter. Everybody on the planet wanted Emeka Egbuka out of high school. He chose Ohio State. This is his kind of breakout season, or at least potentially could be. Carnell Tate's another one. People forget Carnell Tate even exists, not because he's not any good, but he's been behind a long list of All-American wide receivers and NFL wide receivers. This is his chance to shine this year. And then, of course, they bring in Jeremiah Smith, who was probably the most day one ready football player out of last year's recruiting class, the wide receiver Jeremiah Smith. He'll play a lot for Ohio State. Will he start? I don't know. Start is almost an irrelevant term at some of these skill positions anymore, like running back. Who's your team's starting running back? Maybe it's Travion Henderson. Maybe it's Quinshon Judkins. But point is, does it really matter who plays the first play? If Travion Henderson plays the first play and the second play and then comes out and Quinshon Judkins plays the third play and the fourth play. Anyway, it's a rotation, and Ohio State will treat the wide receiver room the same way. Absolutely loaded there. Now, questions offensively for Ohio State, and I'm saying questions, not problems. I'm not suggesting that these will be problems. I'm saying these are the things I question or have questions about when it comes to Ohio State's offense. Number one, the Chip Kelly thing. How is that transition going to work? How much power, control, and authority is he actually going to be given over that offense? Will he be allowed to call plays? How quickly can the players in the offense pick up whatever new it is that Chip Kelly is bringing to the Ohio State offense? Number two, the offensive line. There are question marks on Ohio State when it comes to the offensive line. When you look at quarterback, they're loaded. They got 3 or 4 guys they'd be happy with. Wide receiver, we already know. Running backs, Travion Henderson, one of the best in the country the last couple of years. They add transfer Quinshon Judkins, an unbelievable running back room. And there's a lot of talent on the offensive line. But if you're sort of ranking your confidence in each position group at Ohio State, maybe this is a better way to put it. The offensive line would be the position group on Ohio State's offense that I have the least amount of confidence in. And it's because I need to see them do it. There's some new faces there. Again, ultra talented. Look at the way they recruit. But if you're looking for question marks offensively for Ohio State, Chip Kelly, how does he fit in? How well does the offensive line come together? And more importantly, how well does it play in the big games? Oregon, Michigan, things like that. And the quarterback play, right? What are they gonna expect from Will Howard, and what is Will Howard gonna give him? I don't think they're bringing Will Howard in to be C.J. Stroud from 2 years ago. I don't. Like I mentioned, I think they're looking for Will Howard to come in and provide more experience and a little bit of a higher ceiling than what they had last year with McCord. I don't expect to see something drastically different in terms of how they use their quarterback this year versus last year. I just think they expect sort of everything to take a step forward quarterback-wise. And I think with the experience and the talent that Will Howard has, there's a pretty good possibility that happens. Now, let's look over on the defensive side of the ball. Now, like I mentioned, this has been an unbelievable turnaround for Ohio State defensively over the last 2 to 3 years. They bring in Jim Knowles. He implements the 4-2-5. A little shaky the first year, but since then, it's been really, really good. Last year, Ohio State gave up 11.2 points per game. That is a elite number. You're going to win a lot of football games giving up 11 points per game, especially with an offense like Ohio State's. So he's done a really, really good job there. And when you look at Ohio State defensively, it's out of those 11, there's 8 or 9 NFL players there. A lot has been made about Ohio State's roster potentially being the most talented roster in the history of college football. I'm not going to get into all that. I don't know that. I don't study recruiting grades specifically and things like that, but I know enough about football to know this. I don't know that there's another team in the country with a more talented top 30 players. I could have said starters, top 22, 11 starters, offense and defense, but, like we mentioned with Ohio State, the wide receivers, they're going to play 5 wide receivers. They're not all technically starters. Same running back. They got some linebackers and defensive linemen that are going to rotate in and out. I don't know that there's a team in the country with a more talented top 30. Now, they may have the most talented roster top to bottom. I'm not saying they have the most talented top 30 because I don't think they have the most talented total roster. I'm not the one to ask about that. I'm not an expert. All I can do is look at the talent rankings on 24/7 and read them off to you. I don't really get myself bogged down enough in the weeds of that to be able to talk about it really in a smart way. But their top 30 is unbelievable. I mean, it might be, it's one of the best top 30 I've maybe ever seen. They're probably going to break draft records next year in the NFL draft because of the combination of their recruiting and the talent that they've acquired there. With the fact that they talked several draft eligible players from last year into coming back from this year. You look at their defense, 10 of the 11 projected starters on defense are upperclassmen. So it does feel like a win now year for Ohio State. Another thing, there's been a lot made of that is it natty or bust for Ohio State? It's kind of always natty or bust for Ohio State, at least from the Ohio State fans' perspective. But 10 of the 11 are upperclassmen. And the one that's not an upperclassman, Caleb Downs, the best player in the portal, regardless of position. He was an All-American as a freshman at Alabama. You know how good you have to be to start as a true freshman on a Nick Saban defense at Bama? The guy is unbelievable. So 10 of the 11 starters are upperclassmen with a ton of experience. In fact, all the starters on Ohio State's offense and defense have meaningful experience. But all are upperclassmen on defensive side, 10 of the 11. And the 11th that's not an upperclassman is Caleb Downs. So it's just a ridiculous amount of talent that they've stockpiled over there. You look at the front, Jack Sawyer's back, JT Tuamaliau. I don't name these people, nor do I know how to pronounce their names, but you know who I'm talking about. Tyleek Williams, all of those guys back along the front. You look at the linebacker. Now, they did lose 2 really good linebackers last year, but like I said, When you're a team like Georgia, Ohio State, Bama, whatever, fill in the blank that recruits in the top 6, 7, 8, top 10, whatever, every single year, and you've got, backup players that would be starting in a lot of other places, you rotate players in and out a lot over the course of a season. So just because you lose a couple of quote-unquote starting linebackers from last year, if you're Ohio State, and of course I'm talking about Eichenberg and I forget the other guys at Chambers. Anyway, they lose two quote-unquote starting linebackers from last year. The two that are going to be filling in, Cody Smith and Sonny Styles, I believe, they played a ton last year. So it's not like you're throwing two linebackers out there this year who've never seen the field, right? You go back to the defensive backs. Burke is back at corner, probably their best corner, right? Hancock's there. Benison, again with the names. I don't name these, but anyway, you get three of them back. The fourth one that you're only losing him because he's moving to linebacker because Caleb Downs is so good. You have to put Caleb Downs on the field at safety. So Styles, who's playing linebacker this year, is moving down from safety, played safety last year. So technically a new starting linebacker, but started last year at safety. It's just a ridiculous amount of talent. So the question marks when you look at Ohio State and you talk to people about Ohio State for this season, it always comes down to the same things. Usually number one is Ryan Day. Well, I don't like Ryan Day. He's soft. He can't win. Ryan Day's going to be fired if he loses to Michigan again. Now, let me say it again. He's won 88% of his games. He's never lost more than 2 games in a season. He's only lost 2 games in a regular season once in his entire career. Ryan Day is not getting fired. They could lose to Michigan 100-0 this year. Ryan Day's not getting fired, okay? If Ryan Day gets fired, it's gonna be because they lose 4 or 5 games, not because they lose to Michigan, not because they lose in the playoffs or anything like that. You're not firing a coach that wins 88% of his games and is averaging like 1.2 losses a year over his 5 or 6 year career. It's not going to happen. So get that wet dream out of your mind now. If you're one of the people that think Ryan Day is getting fired, it's not going to happen. But the questions are legitimate. Can he get over the hump? Will he be able to beat Michigan this year? Is he going to let Michigan beat him for a 4th year in a row? They have the difficult game. They got to travel and play on the road at Oregon. These are the games that Ryan Day has had trouble with in the past. And then, of course, if you get to the playoff scenarios, what happens if they get matched up with an SEC team? Ohio State has had their troubles over the last 100 years with the SEC, but Ryan Day in particular is winless against the SEC. So there are legitimate questions to ask about Ryan Day, and you say, he needs to do this, he needs to beat this team, he needs to do this, he needs to do that, whatever the case. But the idea that he would be fired, to me, is insanity. Even the soft argument, which I've jumped on the bandwagon on that too, because I feel like there has been times in the past where it has applied. I don't think there's anything soft about this Ohio State team at all, period. I don't. Now, whether or not Ryan Day is quote unquote soft is maybe a separate argument from that. Although soft is a sort of mentality that a team takes on that usually trickles from the coach down. You look at Southern Cal, soft. Why? Lincoln Riley trickles down. So, maybe it's impossible for Ohio State to escape the sort of their soft troll job or whatever it is that they get labeled with, as long as Ryan Day is there and perceived as soft. And look, I feel like I've been very complimentary up to this point of Ohio State and Ryan Day and their roster and who's on the team this year and even Ryan Day. When he does things like barely beat Notre Dame, and instead of celebrating with his team or congratulating his team or whatever, the first thing he does is run over to a microphone and yell and scream about how mean a 90-year-old Lou Holtz was to him. Like, that's not a good look. Now, the Ohio State fans, some of them liked it. Oh, I like him. He got a fight and he's standing up, and it was a bad look. Okay, that didn't look good. There's a million analysts, and they all have a million things to say every single week about different people and different things within the world of college football. Just recently, Deion Sanders is going back and forth with CBS because he doesn't like some articles they wrote. And guess what? That's a bad look. Just like Ryan Day yelling and screaming about a 90-year-old Lou Holtz is a bad look, okay? Yeah, so let's get past that if you're Ryan Day. It doesn't matter what the outside perception of Ohio State is. The reality is there are going to be people who are going to continue to beat this drum that Ohio State is soft, Ohio State is soft, Ryan Day is soft, Ryan Day is soft. They're going to continue to beat that drum as long as you continue to lose to Michigan, fail to win the Big Ten, and don't do anything in the playoffs. That's just the reality. Ryan Day's got I think he's got a playoff. He's got one playoff win back in the COVID year, maybe. But since 2020, really, they've accomplished in terms of, they've accomplished really nothing, right? They've lost to Michigan in 21, 22, and 23. That cost them the Big Ten in 21, 22, and 23. They did manage to get into the playoffs in 22, but they lost in the first round. And not only that, they lost to an SEC team, which contributes to that narrative as well, right? Ohio State fans get the most mad when you sort of propagate those two narratives. Number one, they're soft. Number two, they can't beat the SEC. Those are the two things that sort of set Ohio State fans off the most. Well, when you do things like yell about Lou Holtz, that just reinforces the you're soft narrative. When you do things like lose to Georgia 2 years ago in the playoffs, lose to Missouri last year in a New Year's Six game where you couldn't even get a first down, when you continue to do that, it propagates those narratives. So I get it. You don't like the fact that people tell you all the time that you can't beat the SEC, or they tell you what your record is against the SEC. I get it. You don't like it. Beat an SEC team. Beat Michigan. Win the Big Ten. Win some playoff games. Let's find out if they can do it. I'm going to put their schedule up on the screen now. We're going to go through it game by game. I'm going to give you a winner and a loser for every single week. All right, you guys know how this works. I try as hard as I can to give every team a loss. It's hard to go undefeated in the world of college football. Here's some teams I've done already and I don't have any of these teams going undefeated. I've done Georgia, don't have them going undefeated. I've done Texas, don't have them going undefeated. Bama, Ole Miss, Tennessee. I've done Michigan, don't have them going undefeated. I've had Penn State, don't have them going undefeated. I've done pretty much all the top teams. I don't have any of them going undefeated, exception of one, which we'll get to in a second. So let's see. Here we go. Ohio State adopts the Michigan scheduling model from the last couple of years here. They play 0 power 4, I guess we'll call it, opponents. I'm not going to give Ohio State a hard time about this. A lot of people will, obviously, just like they do every single year. A team plays no power opponents in the non-con. Ohio State has done a pretty good job of scheduling in the non-con. I mean, Michigan did it 2-3 years in a row, whatever it was. That's ridiculous. I'm willing to give Ohio State the benefit of the doubt here. This is one season with a terrible non-con schedule where they don't play anybody. They play 0 power 4 opponents outside of their conference schedule. They've got Akron, Western Michigan, a bye, and then Marshall. They should win all 3 of those games easily. This will be great for Will Howard. Get his feet wet, get comfortable with the offense, the wide receivers, Quinshon Judkins sort of getting in there and getting going early in the season. Learning the offense, picking everything up. Chip Kelly play calling. How's that going to go? It's closest you're going to get to a preseason in college football is right here. You got a bye week in there too. So the first 4 weeks of the season, not very many people are going to be paying attention to Ohio State. Outside of looking at the box score in the final, there's not going to be a lot of people sitting down on Saturday to watch Ohio State play Akron or Western Michigan or Marshall. Ohio State fans will, but the general college football public won't watch those games, right? They'll just look at the box score at night or the next morning. And you'll be 3-0 4 weeks into the season with that bye week stuck in there. And then the conference schedule starts. And the first one is on the road at Michigan State. They've got a new coach there. I think it's a good hire, Jonathan Smith, Morgan State. I think he'll get them headed in the right direction. I think he'll do a little bit better there than Mel Tucker did, but maybe not this year. There's a complete overhaul going on there from the NIL structure down to the roster to the coaching staff. I think Michigan State's probably in for a rough season first year under Jonathan Smith. And even though it is on the road, and road games can be tricky, I just can't see Michigan State pulling this off. I've got Ohio State staying undefeated. And then you've got 2 critical, huge games in a row. Iowa at home and on the road at Oregon. Iowa doesn't get any respect. They've been in the Big Ten West, which is almost a forgotten part of the Power 5 over the last several years. Their offense has been one of the worst on the planet for the last several years, but they've still got a really good defense, which they bring a lot of starters back. The coaching staff over there is intact, and they're revamping the offense now that Kirk Ferentz finally found the balls to fire his son, Brian Ferentz, who was the offensive coordinator, and bring in somebody that might actually know what the hell they're doing. The problem is I don't trust the talent offensively for Iowa, and it took – look at Ohio State and Jim Knowles and the talent that they had defensively, and it took Jim Knowles really 2 years to get that defense turned around. So even if the new offensive coordinator at Iowa is some kind of a miracle worker, right, you got to figure it would take a couple of years to really show a tangible effect on the field. I just don't expect Iowa to be very good offensively again. I think they'll be really good defensively. and maybe even keep the game close with Ohio State for a while. But it's a home game for Ohio State. I don't see them winning this. Iowa, I think Ohio State gets the win. And then you've got maybe the game of the year in the Big Ten. And I know Michigan and Ohio State is a huge game. I get it. And it'll be a huge game again this year. And for all I know, both teams will make it to the playoffs and play again or something. But I know it's a huge game. But this is a game we don't normally get to see. It's one of the new sort of conference games that people are excited about when you're talking about adding teams to these conferences, whether you're talking about Texas and Oklahoma to the SEC, Oregon, Washington, Southern Cal, UCLA to the Big Ten, whatever the case. This is a marquee game here. Just a massive game. I think these are two of the best teams in the country, Oregon and Ohio State. I've done an Oregon version of this video already where I talk a lot about Oregon. So if you're curious about my thoughts on Oregon, you can check out the playlist of the 2024 team predictions that I've done. Click on the Oregon video. But I think they're unbelievably talented. I think Dan Lanning is building a real monster out there. And he's had some of the criticism and issues that Ryan Day has faced, right? What's Dan Lanning's big win at Oregon? Where is it? Liberty last year in a New Year's Six game. I mean, he's lost 3 straight games to his rival, Washington. He played Georgia a couple of years ago in the regular season and got beat by 40. It's hard to find his biggest win might be against Colorado last year, but they've got a really good game. But like Ryan Day, he has struggled some in big games. This is a huge game for both of these teams here. It's a very hard game for me to pick. I think Ohio State is probably the better team, although I don't think it's a huge difference here. I think Oregon is extremely talented. I'm going with Oregon to win this one. Like I said in the Oregon prediction video, because the game is being played in Oregon. If this game was being played anywhere else, Columbus, Ohio, or a neutral field, I would pick Ohio State. And that's important to remember for something I have to say at the end of the video. So don't click off because I've got you losing a regular season game on the road to Oregon. You got to remember, 12-team playoff. The goal is to get into that 12-team playoff, maybe even win your conference and get a first-round bye. A loss on the road at Oregon, not only does that not eliminate Ohio State from any sort of postseason conversation, Ohio State might lose that game on the road at Oregon and not even drop in the rankings. Because these are going to be 2 top 5 teams when this game is played. But I do give the edge to Oregon because it's at home in a very unfamiliar environment for Ohio State. You come out of that game, you get your second bye week. If you lose that Oregon game, I think this is a good place to have a bye week, sort of give yourself a chance to regroup. Maybe you've got a couple of banged up players here halfway through the season that could really use this extra week here. I think this is a good place for this second bye week. You come out of that bye week and then you play another pretty physical game here in Nebraska. Like Iowa, Nebraska had a pretty good defense last year and an offense that was just horrible. They kept turning the ball over. They had probably the worst quarterback play of any team in the Power 5. And like Iowa, I think they'll be better offensively this year than they were last year. It's you get them at home, and they just don't have the horses right now. Year 2 under Matt Rule to beat an Ohio State. I know what Matt Rule's track record is in year 2 at schools. I can't see this version of Nebraska with probably a true freshman quarterback there, Dylan Raiola. I can't see Dylan Raiola beating this Ohio State defense. I think Ohio State gets the win there. On the road at Penn State. There are certain things that could happen, but I'm never picking them to happen until they do or until I see them again. People can tell me till they're blue in the face that Lincoln Riley has had some kind of a light bulb moment or something, and he's changing everything, and now the defense is finally going to matter at Southern Cal. I'm not going to believe that until I see it on Saturdays in the fall. And Penn State might beat Ohio State. They're a talented team. If Drew Aller takes a significant step forward, because let's be real, although they struggled with explosive plays or sort of Sports Center highlight plays last year, Drew Aller had a good year numbers-wise. They, too, have a really good running back room, maybe the second best running back room in the Big Ten. They've got a good offensive line. They've got one of your wide receivers, Julian Fleming, that would be playing this year. He did go to Penn State, right? Oh, God, tell me I'm wrong on that. I don't know why Syracuse is in my mind now, but I know that's because the quarterback went to Syracuse. Anyway, it doesn't matter. Ohio State is winning on the road at Penn State. I can't pick Penn State to win one of these games. It is a benefit to Penn State. Penn State probably benefits the most of any team in the Big Ten by the separation of divisions, right? They've been stuck behind Ohio State and Michigan for what seems like forever at third in the Big Ten East. Penn State was better almost every single year than whoever was winning the Big Ten West. But it didn't matter because of the division structure, right? Well, that's out the window now. That will benefit Penn State. They don't play Michigan this year, for example. So the sort of two teams that they've been unable to get past the past 5 or 6 years, they only play one of those two this year. It is at Penn State. I do think this is a game Ohio State could lose. I'll be honest. I've got you losing on the road at Oregon. If there was a second loss up to this point that I could see Ohio State taking, it would be this game at Penn State. Can't pick it to happen until I see it happen. I think Ohio State goes on the road and gets the win. Come back home, play Purdue, a nothing burger team. I'm not a buyer of Purdue. I don't think they're going to be very good this year. Ohio State will name the number there and beat them by a whole lot. And then a pointless neutral field game for no reason at all against Northwestern at Wrigley Field. Now, I know Northwestern's doing some renovations, and that's got a lot to do with it, so I'm not going to dump on them too hard, but just want to reiterate that college football games should be played on college campuses. Yes, Georgia's my favorite team. Yes, we play Florida and Jacksonville every year. Yes, I hate it. And yes, I've been screaming about it since the entire 10 years I've been on YouTube. I don't like neutral site games. They've got stadium renovations. I'll give them a pass. But for no reason at all, Ohio State and Northwestern are playing at Wrigley Field, and Ohio State will beat them. Then you've got Indiana, pretty much the same thing I said about Purdue. You can apply to Indiana. Ohio State's beating them, name the number. And then the biggest game of the year for Ryan Day. Not for Ohio State. This isn't the biggest game of the year for Ohio State. It's not. Some of you may not understand what I'm saying here. This is not the biggest game of the year for Ohio State. This is the biggest game of the year for Ryan Day. From a perception standpoint, Ryan Day's got to win this game. Michigan lost a lot off of last year's national title team. They lost a little over half of their coaching staff. They're under never-ending NCAA investigation and sanction and probation and show cause, and it's showing no sign of stopping anytime soon. And the game is at home for Ohio State. Ryan Day has to win this game. Ohio State could lose this game, and in my opinion, they would still be in the playoffs at 10-2. Now, they wouldn't have a bye because they would have lost to Oregon, if I'm right, and then Michigan, putting them at 10-2, and I don't think that would get them into the Big Ten title game, so they would be a 5 through 12 seed somewhere and have to play a first-round home playoff game. But I don't think that's happening. I think Ohio State beats Michigan. That's the good news. If you're an Ohio State fan, I've got you beating Michigan. Here's the bad news. I've had you beating Michigan each of the last 3 years, I believe. With the exception maybe of last year, I'd have to go back and look. I might have picked Michigan last year, but I know the 2 years before that I picked Ohio State. So, but I'm a buyer in Ohio State. I believe in the talent. I think talent is the most important thing when it comes to college football. Coaching would be a close second after that, coaching and development. But by talent, I mean recruiting and acquisition of talent, I think is the most important thing in all of college football. And nobody's done a better job of that over the last couple of years in Ohio State. Some have done as good of a job, Georgia, Bama, a few other teams you can name that's just elite level recruiting, whether it be through high school or portal or both over the last 2 or 3 years. But Ohio State is right there with the top dogs in college football when it comes to talent. Bring in Caleb Downs, you bring in Will Howard, you bring in Quinshon Judkins. I mean, it's just unbelievable. To add to you already had a top 3 or 4 roster, and then you bring in 2 of the best transfers in the country in Quinshon Judkins on one side of the ball and Caleb Downs on the other, and what I think is an upgrade at quarterback in Will Howard over what you had before McCord. It's just an unbelievable team. I think you get the job done and beat Michigan. I think Ohio State is 11-1. I've got Oregon at 12-0. I've already done that video, and I've got Michigan, I believe, at 10-2. So this means that I've got Oregon versus Ohio State rematch in a Big Ten championship game. Go back to what I said about the Ohio State-Oregon game a few minutes ago. Great game, 2 of the best teams in the country. Either team could win that game. I'm only picking Oregon because it's being played at Oregon. That's what I said a few minutes ago. I told you if it was played anywhere else, either Columbus or a neutral site, I'd probably pick Ohio State. Well, guess what? The Big Ten championship game is played on a neutral site, and I think Ohio State probably gets the job done in a rematch in Indianapolis against Oregon in the Big Ten title game. That's my prediction for Ohio State. I've got them at 11-1. Could they go 12-0? Yes. 10-2, I think, is worst case scenario. I don't think they will lose 2. So at Oregon, at Penn State, those are 2 difficult road games, right? And then home against Michigan. Those are the 3 toughest games for Ohio State. I can't see a scenario where they lose all three. Those are tough games. And sure, the ball bounced one way or the other, and you could come out of that thing with a close loss instead of a close win. Maybe it even happens twice. I don't think a team as talented as Ohio State is going to lose to all three of those teams. Compare that to sort of a Georgia schedule scenario, right? Georgia plays this year on the road at Bama, on the road at Ole Miss, on the road at Texas. Three of the most difficult road games you could possibly have. I think Georgia's really, really good. I don't think they're winning all three of those games. I also think they're too good to lose all three. So it's a similar thing that Georgia and Ohio State are facing. I've got Georgia at 11-1. I've got Ohio State at 11-1. I think either team could potentially go 10-2 or 12-0. I sort of split the difference with both of those teams and landed on 11-1 for both Georgia and Ohio State. So I've got the Buckeyes at 11-1, a loss on the road in Eugene at Oregon midway through the season. A rematch with Oregon in the Big Ten title game in which Ohio State wins. Ohio State Big Ten champion, trip to the playoffs, and a first round bye. All right, appreciate you watching. Make sure you let me know down below how stupid I am, and have a good morning.